All right, hello everyone, and welcome to lesson number 4 in Unit 1, AOS1, Thinking Like an Economist for PCE Economics. Today we're going to be looking at the traditional and modern view of consumer behavior and how what economics kind of expects from consumers isn't always true, and how we're actually beginning to understand how people behave and how they spend their money in more and more relevant and accurate ways. It's going to lead into, after that, the modern traditional view of business behaviors and overarching look at how incentives impact behavior in both consumers and businesses. So let's get right into it and look at what we are going to be looking at today. So consumers, we're going to be looking at the traditional economic viewpoint of consumers, such as rationality, ordered preferences, informed decision-making, and marginal benefits from consumption. We're going to look at economic factors that may influence economic decisions made by consumers, such as utility maximization, budget constraints, and internal influences on economic decision-making, such as personality types, ethics, and habit. And then external influences such as culture, marketing, and government, as well as then the way consumers may respond to positive and negative incentives, and the ways technological change can impact on consumer behavior. So a lot to get through, but it's all relatively simple. We're going to look at it in dot point form and expand upon it. Let's get into it. So in the traditional view of consumer behavior, we have 3 key assumptions that we make. And in economics, we make assumptions because not everything is always going to be equal all the time. So we have to make some assumptions to make things consistent and relevant all the time that we use them. So we're talking about consumers in the traditional viewpoint, that they act with all the information. They make informed decisions, which means that before they make a purchase, they're going to do all the research possible to make sure they are making a purchase that is going to maximize their utility. So make informed decisions. So they do all the research. If you were my father-in-law, he would definitely line up with that. When we wanted to buy a new fridge, he did research into all of the fridges, sent us a short list of which fridges had the best reviews, which ones lasted the longest, which ones were the quietest, all those kind of things, and therefore was making a massively informed decision. It's also assumed that consumers act rationally, which means that we are always doing the smartest or the most logical thing with our money. We don't act impulsively, which isn't always the truth, but that's the traditional view. And also that we have ordered preferences. So that's basically stating that when we say essentially when we get paid, we have an order of how we are going to spend that money based on its importance. So it's expecting that we are going to pay like our bills, etc. first, and food, etc., and then your luxuries at the end with what's left over, which probably depending on who you are, that's not always the case. We used to always joke when I was in high school, there was one point where my parents went on a holiday for a couple of weeks and they left me like $80 for food and transport for the week. And it used to be a big joke because I was just like, well, I can just survive on the food in the house, and rather than getting the bus, I can walk or ride my bike to school, and I can use that $80 to buy Grand Theft Auto. And like this is like 12 years ago, so it was like Grand Theft Auto 3. It was very different technology, but that's obviously not using order preferences and probably not also acting rationally. So with that $80, I kind of jumped straight to that last step. Rather than buy food that would nourish me really well and maximize my overall living standards, I thought I'd go straight for the impulsive decision of buying something I wanted, which is not the traditional viewpoint at all. So some of the economic factors that affect our decision making. So consumers are expected to consider the marginal benefits of each purchase. So we have this thing called marginal utility, which is a term used to describe the extra satisfaction gained from additional quantities of a good or service at a point in time. So it's essentially every time you purchase a certain good or service, how much more enjoyment you are going to get out of it. It's the reason why, as we look into this a little bit further on with the evolution of it, why we change things up every now and then. We don't just eat the exact same things every day, some of you probably do, but for the most part, we tend to not just do the same things all the time, because if we say, for example, I always use the example, if your parents made you the same sandwich for lunch every day you start to enjoy that a little bit less, and therefore your marginal utility from that is diminishing. We call that diminishing marginal utility. Each time you enjoy it a little bit less. And so we consider that. And so sometimes we'll change it up to maximize our marginal benefits. We also look at budget constraints. So because of limited budgets, we must live within our means. So when income rises, we often move from inferior goods up to superior goods. Often if you get a pay rise or you fall into more money, you start, like, you might, rather than just buying whatever's the cheapest, you might buy whatever you enjoy the most. Therefore, we're always just going to act within whatever budget we have. Then we've got internal influences. So things like personality type, marital status, and habits that affects how we spend our money. So the fact that I'm married and have a 1-year-old daughter greatly affects how I spend my money, because I spend a lot more, or mainly, like, if you end up seeing my Year 12 videos, I talk about a lot. I spend a lot of money on picture books because I have a 1-year-old daughter and I enjoy them quite a bit. So I spend a lot of money on picture books. Habits also affect my spending a lot. So I am a long distance runner. And so I spend, well, because I'm a long distance runner, I spend a lot more money on food because I need to fuel myself for that. But I also spend a lot of money on shoes. I spend a lot of money on just random gear like shorts, singlets, hydration vests, hats. It's all these things that my habit costs a lot of money. And so your habits then greatly impact things overall. Lifestyle and occupation. So as a teacher, I tend to spend more on stationery technology. So like this drawing tablet that I use to do these things on here, that's all part of like internal influences. I want to do my job as good as possible. Therefore, I'll spend money on doing my job. Values and code of ethics. So whether you buy sustainable things, you try and buy things that have less plastic in them to be environmentally friendly. That's going to affect some of your spending. Appetite for risks. So you might be more willing to gamble and stuff if you have a strong appetite for risk. You might do risk-taking behaviors. You might go skydiving, etc. Other people won't do that because they don't have that appetite for risk. And then perceptions. So just your overall perceptions and beliefs. For example, some people will spend money on fortune tellers. I would never do that because I think that's dumb. But some people think they can believe in that. Like, that's up to them. And they might think that it's going to have a positive benefit for them. So that's up to them, and that can impact their overall spending and enjoyment of life. You've got external influences, so feedback from family, friends, etc. So if you buy a certain item of clothing and friends and family are like, oh, that looks awesome on you, you're probably going to end up spending more on that type of thing. Your family might tell you that, hey, you're starting to look like you're gaining a bit of weight. That might affect how you spend your money. Wouldn't be very nice of them. They shouldn't body shame you, but that might affect how you spend your money. Your demographic and social status. So if you are wealthy, you're probably going to spend more money on like things that make people think that you're wealthy or to fit in with other wealthy people. Your culture and subculture. So if you're into certain groups or religions, there's going to be certain things that affect your money spending there. What you purchase is going to be greatly affected by religions, beliefs, etc. Your ethnicity. Certain ethnicities are going to spend more money on certain things and they won't spend money on other things. Marketers and advertising agencies are really effective at making you want things. So this is amazing in the current era, like because of like cookies and algorithms in the internet, you can have a thought and Google and Apple know what you want and they will directly target that advertising towards you, and then maybe you'll fall for it and buy things. It happens all the time. Like if you listen to, I recommend if you ever need a podcast, listen to the Hamish and Andy podcast. But Hamish Blake, very, very funny man, but he's a complete sucker for buying things that are advertised to him online, to the point where in their podcast, they have something called Impulse Club, where he will get other people who also fall for these advertisements online to buy pointless things you don't need, to call in and they'll buy them together to try and save money. Government policies and laws. So this is a simple one. My example of this is always like with legislation or laws. Things like, it's a law that if you ride a bike, you need to have a bike helmet. Therefore, if you want to ride a bike, you're more likely to buy a bike helmet as well, because it is legally required for you to do so. If you have a baby, you're going to have a car seat for your car. Therefore, that law is going to externally influence you into buying that. So these are all things from outside of you that are going to influence the way you spend your money. Then the effects of technological change on consumer behavior. So buyers now are more informed than ever before and have far more choice than in the past. Because online shopping is now commonplace and technology has progressed rapidly, this really impacts how we spend our money. So, for example, not that you've been able to go to shopping centers much this year, but when I go to shopping centers, often if I find something that I want, the first thing I do is get out my phone and just like punch it in and then see if it's cheaper anywhere else. And if it is, I'll just buy it online. And so that's made it more difficult for brick and mortar stores to get customers in there because they're competing with online businesses which have way lower overheads, which are not paying for rent, etc. And therefore, that's greatly affected consumer behavior because the harder thing for consumers now is we also have access to cheap things online all the time. So we can like spend money while we're at breakfast, or you could be in bed and can't sleep, so you spend $100 on online shopping. Then also technology progressing rapidly. So a new iPhone comes out every year. Every 5 to 10 years, games consoles come out. New technology all the time, smart TVs, smart fridges, smart everything. And therefore, that keeps consumers purchasing because they want to have that new technology to keep up with everyone else. And then finally, the ways consumers respond to positive and negative incentives. So this is essentially, there are many, many different types. We're going to go into this in more detail on a later date, but typically positive incentives work as a carrot, makes you want to do something. So sometimes if you're offered discounts, if you're offered loyalty programs, if you are offered like limited time offers, these incentivize you to purchase a good or service. So at the moment, Macca's, it's like November when I'm recording this, Macca's has like their 30 days of deals, and that incentivizes people to come in because a certain thing is cheap that day. And therefore that's going to get them come in. They might end up buying other things as well. We also use subsidies. There's subsidies on things like solar panels, and therefore people are more likely to buy solar panels because they are cheaper and there's going to be a benefit for them. Then we've got negative incentives, which often work as a stick, which basically punish you for doing a certain activity or behavior. This can be things like taxes, fines, anything like that. So the fact of if you want to buy petrol for your car, you've got to pay excise tax on it. There's really high taxes on alcohol, cigarettes, anything the government doesn't want you to do, there tends to be negative incentives attached to. And therefore that tries to negate consumer demand for those goods and services and prevent them from purchasing it. All right, so that's been it for consumer behavior. So the traditional viewpoint of consumers, as well as a few of the things that actually impact on our decision making in the modern viewpoint. There's a little bit more to go with this, so we might end up having like a little offshoot presentation for it when I make it up. But in the next video, we're going to be looking at the traditional viewpoint of business behavior and the modern viewpoint of business behavior. If you want a worksheet that lines up with any of this, feel free to look in the description. It is just in a link below. Leave a comment. If you have any questions, send me an email as well. That is totally okay. More than happy to help. And other than that, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.